Today on History's Tech, we are looking at the aircraft that screams British air superiority. We are looking
at the Supermarine Spitfire.
now, while they were developed in parallel with their competition, the Hawker Hurricane. After the Battle of Britain, they would go on to be the principal aircraft of the Royal Air Force and would be used in European, Mediterranean, Pacific, and even Southeastern Asian theaters. But let's go ahead and look at the ever famous
Supermarine Spitfire.
The development of the Spitfire starts with the British Air Ministry, which started a modern fighter program known as the Specification F-730 program. And the idea behind this was to replace the current Gloucester Gauntlet. Now, several designs would be submitted for this. The whole idea behind this new idea was a new, faster plane that could exceed 250 miles per hour. Now, Gloucester actually submits multiple designs. That includes this, the Blackburn F3 and the Westland F730.
Now, Supermarine decides to enter this competition with a monoplane that they called the Supermarine Type 224.
And this was an open cockpit monoplane. It was very bulky, had a very unusual wing design. And in the end, the British Air Ministry decided that the Type 224 was not what they were looking for, and instead went with a different Gloucester design known as the Gloucester Gladiator.
Now, as for Supermarine, this was a disappointment for them. They had wanted their design to win,
but didn't want to just abandon it entirely. And instead, they decided to clean up their design and design an improved version of it they called the Type 300. And it is this aircraft that would become the prototype
for the Supermarine Spitfire.
Now, in order to make the prototype work, they had to do some radical changes. They had to enclose the cockpit. They had to add an oxygen system to the aircraft. They had to redesign the wings. They needed them to be smaller and thinner and completely change the original pitch of them. They also had to incorporate a brand new Rolls-Royce engine that would later become the ever famous Merlin V12 engine. They then presented it to the Air Ministry, who, while they did like it, wanted some changes. The biggest of which, they wanted it to have at least 6, possibly 8 guns. By doing this, they would actually remove some of the bomb carrying capabilities and the fuel capacity for the aircraft. But they went ahead and made these changes in order to be favored by the Air Ministry. And with this, they finally presented it to a few of the different air units for a few more modifications. The biggest of which was changing the propeller design and a few modifications. And finally, by 1936, the aircraft was ready for testing with different air units. And they managed to get the aircraft up to 348 miles per hour in level flight, meaning this aircraft could really fly. And with this, the British finally decided to introduce this aircraft to the public in 1936. And it was pretty much met with pretty decent enthusiasm. This wasn't saying like it was the greatest thing to the people. That would come later. And so they went ahead and started deploying it to the earliest units, which would be the 19th Squadron in Duxford in 1938. And it wouldn't be long until they saw their first action in 1939 when a group of Luftwaffe bombers actually made an attack on the cruisers HMS Southampton and HMS Edinburgh in Scotland. And they would spend the next several months over Western Europe in various conflicts, such as the Battle of the Netherlands, the Battle of Hague. And overall, the British would lose about 67 Spitfires over France as part of their operations involving Dunkirk. But the legendary status of the Spitfire would appear in July of 1940 during the Battle of Britain. Now, while the Hurricane had more enemy kills as opposed to the Spitfire actually had a better kill ratio. And it's here we actually see some of the first variants of the Spitfire appear. And basically, there's 2 versions. Now, the standard Spitfire was equipped with 4 .303 caliber machine guns. And the plan was to upgrade these because the Luftwaffe were basically getting away with minimal damage. So one modification was to equip them with 8 .303 caliber machine guns, and the other modification was to equip them with 2 20mm Hispano-Suiza cannons and 4 .303 caliber machine guns. Combine that with the maneuverability of the Spitfire, and the Spitfire began to push the German Luftwaffe back in combination with the Hurricane. And when you combine this with the efforts of Lord Beaverbrook, the Minister of Air Production, who started a Spitfire fund to increase Spitfire production, the fame and the legacy of the Spitfire begins to emerge. From here, it becomes a major part of the European offensive for the next 2 years. And the Spitfire's success was actually so good that the Germans actually had to change their tactics. They had to start deploying new upgraded Bf 109s and eventually had to deploy the FW 190 in order to basically push back the British Air Force. And this becomes kind of a regular event of what we'll see between the Luftwaffe and the British, where as each starts to upgrade their aircraft, they're going to have to keep going back and forth. And we're going to see part of this big evolution of Spitfires, where we go from the Mark 1 to the Mark 25 eventually because of this continuous evolution to fight back and forth between the Luftwaffe. Now, sadly, by the mid 1943, a lot of the British aircraft are going to slowly be replaced by American aircraft. The P-47, the P-38, and P-51 will start to become the main aircraft for the defense of bomber aircraft, while Spitfires will still be used until the actual invasion of Europe, mainly to engage Luftwaffe bombers. And by the time the D-Day invasion comes and even into the victory in Europe, they are very much a relegated aircraft, kind of holding the defensive line for the English Channel. Now, they were very well known for their service in the Pacific, where they became known as an adversary for the A6M-0. And while they could take on the Zero for the most part, the aircrafts had a relatively short endurance, and this was not well suited for basically island hopping and flying over vast amounts of oceans. And because of this, a lot of these aircraft were in danger of crashing. In addition to fighting in and around Australia and New Zealand, the aircraft also fought in India and Burma during this time period, where they were far more successful and even repelled multiple Japanese attacks. In addition to flying with British and Commonwealth forces, they also flew with the USSR, the Italian co-belligerent Air Force. This is the Air Force that formed after Italy separated from the Axis powers, and they flew with French Air Force during the Free French era. Now, sadly, very much like the Hawker Hurricane, their career after World War II was pretty much over. While several hundred aircraft would be distributed to multiple countries, including the new French government, the Dutch Air Force, the Greeks, the Belgians, the Indian Air Force, the Southern Rhodesian Air Force would all receive stockpiles. The British themselves ended up retiring the aircraft by the mid 1950s. Now, while the aircraft had a relatively short career, lasting pretty much through the 1940s, because of the amount of campaigns and different theaters it went through, quite a few variants of the aircraft were created. Over the course of the career of the Spitfire, there's about 24 marked variants of the Spitfire, marks 1 through 24. And these are mostly based around things such as engines, performance, reconnaissance variants, but there's a few rather unique ones that I do want to talk about. Now, these include things like a two-seat variant designed for training, which, while the official model was abandoned, unofficial variants of it were actually created. Bubble canopy variants, designs that had redesigned guns, mixtures of guns, and things like that were very much tempted. But arguably the most famous variant of the Spitfire is the Seafire, which was a carrier-based version
Supermarine Spitfire.
And the initial variants of the Seafire were problematic. They weren't designed for aircraft carriers, but later, more robust models were much better suited for these operations. And it was even found that the Seafire 2 was capable of going toe to toe with the A6M50. However, purpose built aircraft still demonstrated that the Seafire just wasn't made for aircraft carrier operations. And by the end of the war, it was removed from service. Now, because the Spitfire served in more than 24 countries, there are more than 240 Spitfires preserved around the world, including 70 of them that fly currently. So there's a really good chance you have the opportunity to see one of these aircraft, not only in a museum, but actually see one of these aircraft fly today.
But there you have it, a look at the Supermarine Spitfire, an incredibly famous aircraft that, while not the greatest track record in terms of early combat experience, it really captures the spirit of the British people, and from there it goes on to serve an absolutely amazing career with the British. But that's it for today. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.